From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali. It's Friday, April 24th, 2015. Mumia Abu Jamal celebrates his 61st birthday in prison today, even as his health continues to be at risk. We'll speak with his eldest son, Jamal ibn Mumia. And Talin Yacoubian, co-chair of the March for Justice, joins us in studio to discuss the 100th anniversary of the start of the first genocide of the 20th century. Yacoubian is organizing the largest commemoration of the Armenian Genocide outside Armenia in Los Angeles. And author Scott Myers-Lipton joins us to discuss his new book, Ending Extreme Inequality, an Economic Bill of Rights to Eliminate Poverty. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Cristina Mislan, Assistant Professor of Journalism Studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. Hi, Cristina. Loretta Lynch was officially confirmed as the nation's new Attorney General in a long-delayed vote held yesterday. She becomes the first African-American woman to hold the post. With only a year and a half left of President Obama's and thus her tenure, she doesn't have much time to make sweeping changes. But among her top priorities are apparently, quote, increasing police morale, as per the New York Times, and tackling the unrest in minority communities. On the same day as her confirmation, former CIA head General David Petraeus was given what amounts to a slap on the wrist by the Eric Holder-led Justice Department. Petraeus was sentenced to 2 years of probation and a $100,000 fine for leaking classified documents. A comparable crime by whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling landed him a serious espionage conviction as federal prosecutors seek a, quote, severe sentence. Now, Cristina, the Holder DOJ was marked by double standards, as the Petraeus and the Sterling cases illustrate. Do you have any hope that Loretta Lynch's leadership could be any different?
You know, actually, I don't think it will be any different. I think, you know, the evidence is in her comments, particularly about the relationship between police officers and non-white communities. So I'm not sure how Lynch believes that boosting police morale will actually do anything to solve the problem of police brutality, or that a better relationship between non-white communities and police officers can actually happen when the people in these communities are being persecuted by the very police officers who are present there. So I'm not quite, there's a disconnect there. And so as we saw those disconnects with Holder, I think we will continue to see the same disconnects, again, particularly because certain interests will continue to be upheld. And so we'll continue to see those disconnects despite, you know, the fact that we do have the first African-American woman as Attorney General. I still think that her presence doesn't really leave me much hope.
And you think she will also have the same standards on the issue of persecuting whistleblowers?
Of course. I don't see any different actions happening at all.
And then media reform activists are celebrating today, the second time this year, after Comcast officially announced it would not pursue a merger with Time Warner today. The telecom giant's $45 billion deal would have created what the LA Times called, quote, a cable, TV, and broadband behemoth. Federal regulators at the Justice Department and FCC were scrutinizing the proposed deal after public outcry over the proposed merger. Comcast announced that the decision to walk away was mutual. The nation's most prominent media reform organization, Free Press, issued a statement by its CEO, Craig Aaron, who said, quote, Comcast's failed bid to control Time Warner Cable should be a lesson for the industry. Communications giants should stop trying to create local monopolies and instead focus on competing to provide the fast, affordable, and neutral internet services that so many Americans demand. Earlier this year, Free Press had led the successful fight to preserve net neutrality. Cristina, it's so rare that there are victories actually benefiting ordinary Americans. How important is this news today?
Yes, it's very rare, actually. And so I think this decision really is just as important as the decision on net neutrality. I think what this demonstrates, you know, we have moments where we actually remember that we live in a democratic society, or we're supposed to live in a democratic society. So I think here's a moment where the public definitely has made a significant shift in politics when people actually voice their concerns. And so I'm actually wondering, though, if we can take a lesson from this. And so, for instance, if we can actually do more than just keep monopolies from becoming more monopolies. And so I'm wondering, maybe here's a thought or maybe a dream of mine, but imagine if we could revisit the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and bring back those regulations that were taken away. And then maybe we can demonopolize our media and telecom industry and we would actually see a new trend, a trend of deliberalism instead of neoliberalism, right? And so we can see that for this moment, this momentum that the public has, maybe there are some alternatives. Maybe there are some different ways of thinking about the structure that we live in.
So go on the offensive rather than the defensive.
Exactly.
And finally, actor Adam Sandler's new film is in trouble after a group of Native American actors walked off the set of The Ridiculous Six. Planned as a satire of the classic film The Magnificent Seven, Sandler's film apparently portrays Indigenous Americans in the stereotyped roles that we've come to expect from Hollywood. At least 9 actors walked off the set. The Indian Country Today Media Network explained that the script, quote, repeatedly insulted Native women and elders and grossly misrepresented Apache culture. Netflix, which will release the film, defended it, saying, quote, it was a broad satire of Western movies and the stereotypes they popularized, featuring a diverse cast that is not only part of but in on the joke. The film's nearly all-white male leads include Nick Nolte, Steve Buscemi, Dan Aykroyd, John Lovitz, and Vanilla Ice. Now, Christina, I predict that this controversy will lead to Hollywood defending the film, saying to people of color, why can't you just take a joke, like with the racist comedy, The Interview? What do you make of it?
Yes, Sonali, I completely agree with you. You know, Hollywood is, of course, one of the more racist institutions that exist in this country and has been for a while. And so time and again, they never seem to actually maybe get that there are consequences to its stupidity, because in this case, that's what it is, especially in the case of The Interview, for instance. And so I'm especially glad to see that actors did walk off the set. If only other actors would take the same approach, maybe we could stop helping Hollywood continue to represent people of color as backwards, savage, laughable, hypersexualized, and all of the other stereotypes that exist. I think one thing that we need to start recognizing is that when people point out the racist representations in Hollywood, it isn't that we're too sensitive, but what we're doing is continuing or pointing out that Hollywood continues to teach audiences that this is okay, that it's just a joke.
Right.
But we all should know it's not a joke and has huge impacts on our worldviews and our actions. So it continues to be really pervasive.
Thank you so much, as always, Cristina, for joining us.
Thank you.
Cristina Mislan is an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Armenians all over the world today are commemorating a grim anniversary, the centennial of the Armenian Genocide, the historical massacre of 1.5 million Armenians at the hands of Turkish forces. The Turkish government for years has resolutely refused to use the word genocide, acknowledging instead that there was blood spilled, but not enough to justify a legal term that carries serious moral weight. Not only has Pope Francis defied Turkey's wishes this past week by using the G word, but even Germany has now decided to support a resolution in its parliament to declare what happened to Armenians as a genocide. Germany's own legacy involving the Jewish Holocaust makes this a significant move. In Southern California, which is home to the largest Armenian population outside Armenia, thousands are expected to gather for a march from Little Armenia to the Turkish consulate. They're calling it the March for Justice. Talin Yacoubian is the co-chair of the march, and she now joins me in studio. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, before we get to the details of the march, how significant is Germany's decision to use the word genocide, and how important is it for any government to use it?
Well, obviously, we were very pleased that Germany, on the eve of the 100th, has decided to take that step. Obviously, there's a correlation between what happened in Germany with the Jewish genocide and what happened before that in 1915 with the Armenian Genocide. And as you know, Hitler's famous words were, after all, who remembers the Armenians? So failing to condemn what happened in 1915 allowed, in many ways, what happened in World War II with Hitler and the Jewish population and others, as you know. So we find it very significant. Unfortunately, Turkey, I don't think, is ready to take that step yet. It's tragic in light of the fact that 100 years have gone by. I mean, it's in a way it defies imagination.
Are you disappointed by the U.S.'s indecision on this matter?
Yes, of course I am. I don't know if you heard, but yesterday there was an indication that this year again, even in light of what's been happening with the Pope last week, President Obama will not, in fact, be using the word genocide. Yes, we are very disappointed.
In Southern California, which is home to the largest Armenian population outside Armenia, there is going to be this major march that reflects the feelings of Armenians perhaps all over the world, that this is such an important issue. How has the Armenian community, particularly in the diaspora outside Armenia, kept alive the stories of the genocide? Do grandparents and parents pass down stories to younger people?
Absolutely. Obviously, the transfer of information in today's internet age is much easier than it used to be. So anyone at any point can go online and research to their heart's desire. And the amount of information and documentation and evidence, photographic, real-time newspapers, is overwhelming. But each family also has their own personal stories. For example, my mother tells a tale of her, great aunts, all 5 of them, who, chose essentially to jump into the river and kill themselves rather than be, raped or tortured, at the hands of the Turkish soldiers.
Wow.
So, that's a personal story, and, a year ago my mother was telling it on stage, and, she teared up, and so did the audience. I mean, that's something that, you can feel on your skin and in your bones. So, absolutely, every family has horrible tales. I mean, I don't know one single family living in the diaspora that is untouched by a very personal story. My husband's grandfather was one of 11 children. He was the only one that survived.
Wow.
So it is 100 years, but it's really not too many generations past. I mean, there are, our grandfathers witnessed, were witnesses. There are still witnesses alive, very old but alive. So, and a lot has been documented. We have archives of 30, 40 years ago. There was a huge effort to document eyewitness tales, and we have all of that.
And so for this younger generation of Armenians who, of course, have no first-hand experience of the genocide and the mass deportations, or even necessarily first-hand transfer of information sometimes, do they have an understanding of what's happening, and how personally do they take it? Do you expect a lot of young folks at the march today?
We do. Actually, that's a very good question. I myself am amazed at their passion and their convictions and commitment to this. I mean, in a way, you're right. I mean, they don't have any, first-hand experience, but they are very committed to this, and also take this very personally. There have been such huge efforts by people in their 20s and in 30. I mean, really in every generation. Yesterday I was at an art exhibit where the students had insisted that they wanted to create art that would commemorate the 100th anniversary, and the variety of pieces that they felt paid tribute to our martyrs was amazing. It was awe-inspiring. People have created new songs for the occasion, new poetry, again, art. The amount of creativity and passion and I really do want to highlight that most of this is very positive. It's not in a negative way, and I'm proud of our community for that. And I also want to stress that the march also itself, I mean, it's in a way, yes, it is a condemnation of the denial, but it's also to honor the memory of our martyrs, and to also be proud that, notwithstanding, 1.5 million slain. 100 years later, our community, Armenians inside and outside of Armenia, Armenians in the diaspora, have not only survived but have really thrived.
Well, the flip side of the focus on the genocide is the critique that some have that the genocide has defined the Armenian community and that people need to get past that. How do you respond?
Well, I'll take that in two parts. I don't think that it's fair to say that we should get past that. Now, the issue of has it defined us? In a way, certainly it has, but also the Armenians date back, are a people that date back thousands of years. I mean, we have a history that's 5,000, 6,000 year old. We have we're one of the oldest languages which is spoken. We have rich culture, heritage. We apparently, we're drinking wine and wearing shoes 6,000 years ago. I don't know if you know, but like last year it was discovered that, in Armenia, a shoe and some winemaking paraphernalia.
6,000 years ago.
6,000 years ago,
Remarkable.
exactly. So we have much more to offer. Music, art, scientific inventions, airplanes. I mean, Armenians have been prolific in giving not only to this community but to the world in what they have. And so I don't think that it's fair to say that we are defined by the genocide. But how can we set that aside? How do you get over or past? It's part of our identity. It's not completely our identity, but it's certainly part of our identity. And there's nothing to get, over or past. It is what it is. It's a fact. And that's really, that's certainly my position on it.
What sorts of commemorations are happening around the country and even the world today? There's a lot of marches, many of them aimed at the Turkish government, as the one in Southern California is. But can you give us a sense of how the world is going to be commemorating the Armenian genocide?
Well, actually, I mean, it certainly is a global commemoration. I was in Armenia a few weeks ago, and everywhere in Armenia you will see signs of the commemoration. This is the Forget-Me-Not flower, which I have.
For our radio audience, it's a purple flower pin that,
yes,
that my guest
and
Talin
it's
is
called
wearing.
the Forget-Me-Not. And the color purple is basically also the color that was decided globally to be taken from the flower, the color that's going to commemorate the genocide this year. And signs of the Forget-Me-Not flower are everywhere globally. Yesterday, I don't know, but the City Hall of Los Angeles was illuminated in purple light. It was absolutely beautiful. The Eiffel Tower will be turning off its lights in commemoration. There are concerts, exhibits, marches, literally in every metropolitan city across the globe. At exactly 19:15 on April 24th, which is 7:15 for us who are not on the 24-hour clock, or not used to that, the church bells all over the world will ring. The types of commemoration are basically as many as the imagination. It is truly a global commemoration, and we are joined by, our friends and neighbors in every country that we live in. So this is not something that's unique to the Armenians. People will be marching who are not Armenian. People are commemorating who are not Armenian. Scholars, Turkish scholars, have been prolific in writing articles regarding what happened in 1915. I really want to highlight that the denial is by the Turkish government. It is not necessarily by the Turkish people. In fact, many Turkish people and scholars have openly apologized and regret that the stance that the government takes. So
and Turkish dissidents can be punished quite severely for speaking up about the genocide inside Turkey.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact,
they speak at great risk.
I was just reading an article about, from a scholar, a professor that now teaches in the United States today, a Turkish scholar, and he said that 25 years ago he was intending to go into the foreign service in Turkey because his father was a diplomat, and he was giving a tour at a museum, and someone asked if there was freedom of speech in Turkey, and he said there's freedom of speech, but not so much freedom after speech.
Huh.
And I know, very clever. In any event, he was arrested almost immediately.
Just for saying that?
Just for saying that. He was arrested right there at the museum, taken to the police station, interrogated for 5 hours, called a traitor, and there was a permanent black mark on his record which disallowed him from taking the Foreign Service exam, and so he went into academia, and he's very happy now. But I mean, imagine the consequences of that one, of a 20-year-old, of that one statement.
So the authorities just proved his point, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about what is going to be happening at 10 a.m. this morning for our Southern California audience, at least those who are listening on live radio. Are people flying in for the occasion, for this march from Little Armenia to the Turkish consulate? And I also know that there's going to be some events in the Bay Area as well.
Well, actually, we're going to be joined. We're going to be joined by a lot of our friends and neighbors from the Bay Area, because the march is the biggest event that's happening outside of Armenia in
Southern
Los Angeles,
California. Yeah.
In Southern California, exactly. We expect thousands of people. Hopefully somewhere around 100,000 people.
Wow.
So the march will begin exactly at 10 o'clock, and I invite everyone who can hear me to definitely join us. We want as big of a turnout as possible. It will be at Western and Sunset. It will begin at Western and Sunset exactly at 10. There will be a short program there. Mary Garcetti will be speaking. The march will go west to La Brea, then south to Wilshire, and then west again to the Turkish consulate at 6 miles. And there will be a program at the end.
So people should wear their good walking shoes.
Stay hydrated, yes.
Yes. It's going to be a cool day here in Southern California. Well, you mentioned earlier that non-Armenians are also participating. What is the importance of the commemorations of this genocide that took place 100 years ago for non-Armenians? Why should non-Armenians understand what happened and why this is such an important issue?
This was a crime, just like any other crime. And I'm a lawyer, and I think we all have an interest that justice be served. And to the extent that a justice is denied, I think that is a crime against humanity. It's not a crime specifically towards Armenians only. I think that everyone has a self-interest in knowing that the world will hold anyone or any government accountable for crime.
And so you are hoping for people to come and march in solidarity. Should they wear purple?
Purple or black.
Purple or black. And you mentioned earlier how a lot of the commemorations were marked by positivity. This is an emotional story, but it's also a grim one. 1.5 million souls killed, millions driven out, the mass deportations. How do you find joy in these commemorations?
Well, it's not joy. There is no joy in it. I would say it's more pride.
Yeah.
Pride
in survival, as you were saying.
Yeah, in survival, in the fact that they have found a way. I mean, think about it. You know, people came out of that desert alive. Yes, 1.5 million died, but some survived. And they did what they had to do to survive. And so, you know, as their descendants, as their direct descendants, you know, we have an obligation to honor their sacrifice, honor their memory, and have that same I guess energy or whatever you want to call it, drive to do our best.
And where can our audience find out more about the March for Justice that's happening today at 10, but also events happening elsewhere?
Everything that is happening is on our website. It's marchforjustice.org, and it's march4justice.org.
That's march4justice.org. The event for our Southern California audience happening 10 a.m., starting on the corner of Western and Sunset, and then proceeding toward the Turkish consulate. And we'll post information for our audience. I want to thank you so much, Talin, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Talin Yacoubian is the co-chair of the March for Justice. She is also a lawyer in Southern California. You can find out more online at march4justice.org. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Today is Mumia Abu Jamal's 61st birthday. The political prisoner and award-winning journalist has spent the majority of his birthdays behind bars. Since his conviction at the age of only 28 for the murder of a white police officer in Philadelphia, Abu Jamal has not let incarceration silence him. He has written books, regularly recorded radio commentaries, and done so much. His supporters, who maintain his innocence, have successfully agitated and organized to thwart his execution, but been unsuccessful in obtaining his release. Recently, Abu Jamal experienced a dangerous medical situation, for which he was hospitalized. The incident sparked renewed concerns over his health and accusations that the state might be trying to kill him through medical negligence. Joining us now for an update on Mumia Abu Jamal is Noelle Hanrahan of Prison Radio. Welcome to the program, Noelle.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We were going to be joined by Jamal ibn Mumia, that is Mumia Abu Jamal's oldest son, but at the very last minute he actually got the opportunity to visit his father on his birthday. We're hoping to bring him on by phone, but in the meanwhile, thank you for coming back on the program. We'd had you on recently, and when we last talked to you, the situation was quite grim. There was a lot of work that you and others were doing to convince prison authorities for Mumia Abu Jamal to have the best care. What is the latest situation?
We learned 2 days ago that the prison has refused to allow Mumia's doctor to talk to the physicians in the infirmary, has refused to allow the doctor to conduct an examination in person, and also is not giving Mumia adequate diagnostic and treatment plans. So we are at a very critical moment. Mumia has chronic conditions that were not treated adequately in the very place that he is right now, which is the infirmary. So while he's able to test his own blood for high sugar levels, he's able to monitor multiple times a day, we are still deeply concerned about the level of care that this correctional corporation, Wexford, and the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections is allowing Mumia Abu Jamal to have, and as well many other prisoners. Mumia is not alone in this situation in terms of inadequate medical neglect.
And so this is a private prison corporation that is accountable to whom exactly?
Certainly it's going to be accountable to us. And it's going to be accountable to all your listeners who care about Mumia Abu Jamal's voice, because we cannot let them provide him with inadequate care. Mumia was very sick for 3 months. He lost 80 pounds.
Wow.
He had high blood sugar records that are noted in the record, and they did nothing. Then he went into diabetic shock. He almost went into a diabetic coma. He was unconscious, and he was taken by ambulance to an outside hospital where they stabilized his condition. Before Mumia could walk, they returned him to the infirmary. When people see Mumia, when they're going to see him today on his birthday, Mumia is going to come out from the infirmary in a wheelchair. He's still very weak, and he has not gotten the minimal care that he needs. And so we are organizing. We've organized a legal team. We've organized a medical team. We've gotten the medical records. And we are organizing and asking everyone that is listening, if you have heard Mumia's voice, if you care about this kind of journalism happening, even from where it is happening, from the bowels of the depths of the American criminal justice system, if you think that's important, then we have really got to keep our eyes on him. And we have got to really push right now, because he's in serious need of our help.
Now, recently, Noelle, a teacher in New Jersey named Marilyn Zuniga asked her elementary school students to write letters of encouragement to Mumia Abu Jamal. She came under so much fire for that she was suspended without pay. Is that a reaction to anything favoring Mumia, a sort of typical reaction?
It is very much so within Philadelphia. Really, the nature of the problem is the Philadelphia police, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the thuggery. I mean, it's not just the third grade teacher who gets abused and gets censored for what was a genuine, kind, humble, someone to get well. It also goes right up to the highest offices of the United States of America, when the Fraternal Order of Police blocked President Obama from having his appointment to the Civil Rights Division only because of that man's association with Mumia Abu Jamal via his old law firm, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So we see this routinely in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and nationally, how the police are trying to censor the information that we're receiving from Mumia by punishing those of us who stand up for him.
And so let's talk a little bit more about the Fraternal Order of Police. Were they known to be behind Zuniga's suspension for doing what she did? How strong a force have they been in keeping Mumia Abu Jamal behind bars?
The Fraternal Order of Police are really, I think, the linchpin. They were behind the Silencing Act that was passed by the governor recently.
Which we discussed last time,
Yeah, we're waiting for that decision right now to take away Mumia's pencils, turn off his phone. They are literally behind many of the attempts to censor Mumia Abu Jamal. They're certainly behind the attempt to block him getting a new trial. There's a lot of evidence that Mumia Abu Jamal is innocent and deserves a new trial. He's been in 34 years. So they have a vested interest. The Fraternal Order of Police are related to the politicians in Pennsylvania and now throughout the country. Like, you would say that Ed Rendell. Ed Rendell was the governor of Pennsylvania. Ed Rendell was also the chair of the Democratic National Committee. So it's very important that we notice that the Fraternal Order of Police are really the lapdogs, thugs, in service of the politicians that want to make sure that Mumia Abu Jamal stays in prison.
So let's talk about his particular sense right now of where he's at. You mentioned in the alerts that you've sent out that the last time you heard Mumia Abu Jamal's voice, it sounded weak, much weaker than normal. Do you know how he is doing mentally? Did the cards and letters that that Zuniga students wrote lift his spirits at all?
You know, it's amazing. All the times that we have actually made our presence known for Mumia, whether it's cards, letters, whether it was sleeping overnight in the ICU to make sure that he knew that we were there, that bolsters his spirit. He comes out and he's vibrant sometimes. I mean, he goes up and down. And so that's why all the pressure, the very early days of the pressure when he first went into the hospital were so important. They were refusing to let his wife see him. They were refusing to let his brother see him. And we wouldn't have been allowed to have Wadia see him today, his wife, and Jamal see him today if it had not been for pressure. So that's super important. We call it like keeping our eyes on Mumia, making sure that we know what's happening with him. The prison is trying to isolate him. The infirmary generally doesn't have visits. So Mumia being in the infirmary generally has meant that he wouldn't be allowed to have visits. We only have visits because of the public pressure. So that's the first step, really, to see Mumia, to touch base with him, to talk to him about his care, to just make sure that he is not going into another crisis and that he regains his health. It's going to be a long process, but we are going to be there. His family's going to be here. His supporters are going to be there. Pam Africa is going to be there. We are all at the prison trying to make sure that the prison is doing what they need to do. Now, for the moment, the prison doctors are going to be delivering the health care. So we have to make sure that the treatment plan is the right plan and that we influence the Wexford Corporation, a for-profit corporation that delivers health care in Pennsylvania prisons. We have to make sure that that diagnosis, the diagnostics, treatment, and the referrals, that the referrals for his chronic conditions are done.
Noelle, I wish I could have asked the questions of Jamal ibn Mumia directly, that's Mumia's son, about what it's been like to be separated from his father all these years. And I appreciate you stepping in at the last minute, but you know Mumia very well, you know the family very well, you've been close to this issue, and I'm wondering if you can give us your sense of what the separation has been like in how it's impacted the family. And of course, this is the separation that millions of families around the country have gone through when their loved ones have been imprisoned.
You know, if you have a moment, we have here right in our studio, Prison Radio studio, Mumia's nephew, Wayne Alexander. Would you like to talk to him
Yes.
for a moment? Wayne, come on over.
Oh my goodness.
I'm gonna take the headphones.
Yes.
Wayne is working in the office. We're working, like, going through tons of paper. We are like
Let's
so
do it.
busy.
Live programming, folks. Here we go.
Hello, how you doing?
Hi, Wayne. Thank you so much for
right.
I'm so grateful that we have somebody from Mumia's family to talk to us. What has it been like to be separated from somebody that, you know, some part of your family that you care about for all these years?
Well, me and my family have been going through a hardship. We love my uncle dearly, and we think about him every day. And our heart goes out with him, and I know he's going through something right now. He's sick, and we're trying to get him medical treatment. So I'm here, like, busting it with Noelle, and we're trying to get him health care. And if anybody's out there that will listen, I mean, we're doing donations through was it Indiegogo, and it's.com if you want to go. We're trying to raise as much as we can for him. Our defense is trying to make him free, trying to get him healthy.
And in terms of the separation, you know, we to have a family separated, and to have to only see him when prison authorities deem it. And this is a person whose voice has influenced many people around the country through his insightful commentaries, and yet is not able to, you know, be physically with his family all these years. I'm wondering how you can convince people around the you know, who are listening, how important it is to free Mumia Abu Jamal. We can still talk about the fact that he does need freedom, even though it's been all these years.
Yes, he's free. I mean, he's innocent on all charges. I mean, I believe, our family, everybody believes he's innocent, and he should be out. He should be free. And it's our government that's keeping him behind there, and they just don't like what he's saying and how he comes out, and his freedom of speech. And we need to do whatever possible to get this free man out of prison. And that goes for everybody. I mean, I understand if you look at your family, if it was your family that was locked up, how would you feel? Do you know what I mean? So it's very crucial that it happens. So we got to free Mumia now.
And the Indiegogo page that you've set up, if you go to Indiegogo.com and search for Mumia, you'll find the campaign called Mumia Abu Jamal Needs Medical Care Now. $27,000 raised so far by 500 people. And certainly the more people donate, the better it would be for the, because it's expensive, of course, to fund prison care.
Yes, medical care is very expensive. you know, I mean, anybody knows if you go to the hospital, it's going to cost you money. So.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Wayne, and best of luck to you and your family as you continue to work for your uncle's freedom. And also thank you to Noelle Hanrahan. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Wayne, who is the nephew of Mumia Abu Jamal. Before that, Noelle Hanrahan, director of Prison Radio, who records and distributes Mumia Abu Jamal's commentaries. You can find out more online and listen to his commentaries at prisonradio.org. We'll also post a link to the Indiegogo page at uprisingwithsonali.com later today. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. Scour the financial news and you'll see upbeat headlines touting the higher-than-expected profits of GM and Boeing and Dow Chemical. Wall Street is celebrating for its bounced back. And by the measures of stock prices and quarterly earnings, the U.S. economy does indeed look like it's headed toward a full recovery. But measuring by employment, wages, job security, and those real-life indicators for the 99% recovery is still elusive. In fact, it's a dirty secret of capitalism that the free market could never provide enough jobs for full employment, nor does it necessarily want to. So, how can leaders who might care about a real economic recovery solve the problem of persistent unemployment, underemployment, and poor job quality? Author and sociologist Scott Myers-Lipton offers an outline. In his new book, Ending Extreme Inequality, Lipton lays out a series of rights that Americans ought to demand and work toward that he calls the Economic Bill of Rights to eliminate poverty. Included in those rights are the right to a job, a living wage, a decent home, a good education, adequate medical care, and protection from the losses that result from sickness, accidents, old age, and unemployment. Articulating this six-part Economic Bill of Rights is a clear first step on a long-term solution to ending poverty, rather than the short-sighted pro-corporate approaches that leaders often adopt. Hillary Clinton, take note. Scott Myers-Lipton is a professor of sociology at San Jose State University. His earlier books include Rebuild America, Solving the Economic Crisis Through Civic Works, and Social Solutions to Poverty, America's Struggle to Build a Just Society. And we're now going to be discussing his new book, Ending Extreme Inequality, an Economic Bill of Rights to Eliminate Poverty. Welcome to the program, Scott.
Sonali, thanks so much for having me on.
Now, let's first examine the history of how the U.S. has approached high unemployment. The strongest example that we have is, of course, FDR's New Deal and the Works Progress Administration. Why is that New Deal history so relevant to today?
Well, it's relevant because it was the single greatest drop in unemployment in the history of the country. Before that, there was not a federal commitment to really solve social problems in general and unemployment problems in particular. The New Deal, that's what that language is about. It represents a break from the past 150 years of the country to say the federal government is going to have a direct intervention in solving the social problems of the country, in particular unemployment. And what they did, the single greatest drop from 24%, and if you include the public workers, down to 10%, a 15% drop. And what do? They rebuilt the country by building infrastructure, hiring nurses, hiring teachers and painters. And we could talk more about that, but it was a huge success. The right doesn't want to talk about it because it was so successful, but it really is the groundwork for this new idea of an economic Bill of Rights.
And I want to turn to President Obama and why he didn't use the same approach. But before we do that, in between the New Deal and Obama, in the 60s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was getting ready to lead his Poor People's Campaign before he was assassinated. And then about less than a decade later, his widow, Coretta Scott King, continued some of his work. In the 1970s, she formed the National Committee for Full Employment. And this is a little-known history, at least I hadn't really heard about it before. She actually got President Carter to sign a bill called the Humphrey-Hawkins Full Employment Act. And what was that act, and where did it go? Because it sounds kind of nice.
Yeah, it's you know, what's interesting about writing a book is you get to learn as well, and I did not know that history as well, of that his widow, Coretta Scott King, says that it's the fulfillment of my husband, Dr. Martin Luther King, that his his dream that we celebrate every January 15th was Humphrey Hawkins, which says this, that everyone has the right to a job. It's because capitalism doesn't produce enough jobs, both structurally as well as cyclically. It doesn't produce enough jobs and enough living wage jobs. Therefore, when the unemployment rate rises above 3%, the president is required to provide Congress a plan of public works to reduce unemployment below that 3%, to drive it down through massive public works. And here's the interesting and amazing thing, Sonali, and for all the activists that are listening, Humphrey Hawkins still exists. You read out there, maybe in online, it's been sunlit, or what do they call
Sunset?
it? Sunsetted. It hasn't been sunsetted. I've talked to the office, in the congressional office. The major parts of Humphrey Hawkins still exist. So we can use, as progressives, we can use this idea of Humphrey Hawkins to demand that the president and Congress act on and to enforce the law, not to create new laws, but to enforce the laws that already exist.
And so what, Congress just started ignoring this over the years?
Exactly.
Wow.
They just refuse to take it up. No, there's this language that it's been sunsetted, but no, it exists. It requires the president, so we can use it as an organizing tool to demand our jobs.
Then President Obama, after the Great Recession hit, instead of adopting an FDR-like approach to addressing the recession, he launched the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was much more complicated, not as direct, and certainly didn't have the wild success that the New Deal did, that the WPA did. How successful was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act?
Well, I think it saved the capitalist class. For that happened. The question was, what happened to the regular folks? And the regular folks are still waiting for the recovery. I think you can look at it just through the 6 rights. For example, the right to a decent housing. Instead of what we did in the New Deal, which had the federal government come in and take over the loans themselves from the banks, push the banks out, gave them government bonds, and then took the loans and then worked individually with all the various folks that had loans so they could stay in their house. This administration, what they did was they gave the money to the banks and said, please give that up, which they refused to do. So we had over 5 million people foreclosed on, another 5 million people still waiting to be foreclosed on. And that's the kind of, I think, progressive action that can be taken. And we could look throughout the whole, the stimulus package. The other is half the money was given to a tax credit, which is usually on the other side. When you look at who's getting tax breaks, that's usually our opposition that's saying that, not more of the progressive activists, which would say get the money in the hands of the people.
Right, instead of having it trickle theoretically, which of course it doesn't do. There was also, just staying on the past for a minute, there was also this idea of a guaranteed national income that you talk about in your book. It was strangely proposed by conservative economist Milton Friedman, and it actually had support from both parties, yet in the end, that idea gave way to the, I think we can safely say, failed war on poverty. How did that happen?
Well, here's what I would, I think we should do. I shouldn't say I would do. I think we on the board of the progressive side should really know our history. And several of these ideas have been supported by conservatives or developed by conservatives. This is Milton Friedman's idea that everyone deserves a guaranteed income. And if you go back to the record, Martin Luther King, this was one of his 3 proposals when he was on that march the Poor People's Campaign, the right to a job through public work, and the right to a guaranteed income. The other was housing. And so that plan was scuttled at the very end. It was put forward by President Nixon, but then got undermined because they couldn't agree on the exact amount of what the guaranteed income is. But Switzerland has put forward, they're going to vote on it this year, $2,800 for every individual adult in the community in Switzerland to have a guaranteed income. Now, it would take away
$2,800 a month?
Exactly.
Wow.
And that would take away, you know, other programs are going to go away that would support folks, but every individual gets $2,800, and they look at it as kind of the end of slavery. In this case, the end of wage slavery. So people don't have to do, you know, jobs that they don't want to do and get paid a crummy wage for it. They could say, no, we want a better job, one that we're passionate about, and not have to feel like they have to take that job because they have to survive. So that's going to be voted on in Switzerland. The Swiss folks have put that forward. But those are the kind of progressive ideas I think we need to look at for solving our problems in our country.
Meanwhile, here in the United States, even the very, very bare minimum vestiges of the welfare state that are left, we are trying to hold poor people more and more accountable, you know, vouchers instead of dollars, taking drug tests, and only being able to withdraw a certain amount out of their ATM in certain states now that we've just seen. So a very different approach. Now, let's talk about, you distinguish in your book the right to a job and the right to a living wage. Why make that distinction?
Well, I think there's two rights. One is that the realization, and this is the dirty secret that no one wants to generally the media doesn't want to talk about, is that capitalism itself doesn't create enough jobs in general, and that has been shown historically. And here's the thing: major Americans that who have said this don't that's never talked about. Roosevelt said it, King said it. And that has to be addressed. So we have to create the jobs, but they've got to be living wage jobs, because they got to be able to put food on the table to make ends meet. So we don't get, we're stuck in these poverty jobs, which is what we have today. 28% of all jobs are paying poverty level. 58% of all jobs since the Great Recession at poverty level. So we've got to create living wage jobs, and that's why my work in San Jose has been on that minimum wage campaign to try to raise the bottom, which is stuck and have been fought by the conservatives, up to closer to a living wage. We all realize that we have now $10 in San Jose, and maybe we could talk about that campaign. But we're at 10 now, but we're gonna try to go even higher.
Right. You have worked with activists to raise the minimum wage of San Jose, where you live, from 8 to 10 an hour. Well, why talk about the other rights in your book, such as the right to housing, decent housing, adequate medical care? If people had a living wage, wouldn't those other things follow automatically?
Absolutely, and Dr. King said the exact same words. If you have the right to a job and a living wage, a lot of these other problems will be taken care of by itself. But at the same time, there are a lot of activists that are working on education and housing, and they are important in and of itself. So that.
Scott, we just lost your audio. We're going to try to call you back, or maybe there's something that got unplugged from your computer. Scott Myers-Lipton is my guest. He's a professor of sociology at San Jose State University, and we're talking about his book, Ending Extreme Inequality, an Economic Bill of Rights to Eliminate Poverty. And Scott Myers-Lipton is also an activist who has worked to increase the minimum wage in his city of San Jose. Scott, are you with us?
I'm here.
Yes. So continue your thoughts about why we do need to articulate those other rights as well.
Well, first of all, let me say one thing about the larger framework. I really believe that progressives need to have a framework that is as powerful as our opposition. And the idea of the Economic Bill of Rights gives us that framework. So I want to say that clearly. We need a framework. The Economic Bill of Rights gives us that framework. And then we can work on these various 6 or 7 different ideas, but have a framework which we're trying to drive the nation toward. And the framework is we don't have our economic rights. And one of these economic rights, for example, the right to housing, we don't have that. And Roosevelt said decent housing, not just housing, but decent housing. And so just forget.
And we're going to try to get you back on, where we keep losing the audio. Maybe we can bring Scott on the phone to continue the conversation, the very interesting conversation that we're having about why it's important to articulate the rights, the economic rights of Americans beyond just jobs or good jobs, jobs with living wage. Scott, do continue.
Yeah, I'm here. So let me say about the right to housing.
Yeah.
So, for example, President Obama has tried to get $1 billion into a dedicated housing source. We can't even do that. Really what we need is closer to $15 billion. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, so if we need closer to, and there's a bill right now to get us $15 billion because there's not enough money into our low-income housing to actually build enough housing units for our people. So one is that there's just a lack of commitment both on the construction of low-income housing. If you look at other nations have 30 or 40% of the government controls housing. We're under 4% in this country. So our folks have to be in the free market system to try to get housing, and they can't find housing units with those crummy poverty jobs they have. So therefore, they can't afford, the housing. And so they're spending 40 and 50 and 60% on their housing, which puts incredible strain. So we need a massive rebuilding of our housing, particularly for low-income housing folks.
And let's talk about some very concrete ideas then in the last few minutes of our conversation. Scott, tell us first about the story for raising the minimum wage in San Jose from $8 to $10 an hour. And also I'm wondering what you make of New York Mayor Bill de Blasio's environmental jobs program. He wants to lift 800,000 residents out of poverty or near poverty in the next decade. It's supposed to be the largest urban poverty reduction effort ever in the country. And I'm wondering if you're optimistic in general.
Yeah, I think there is a movement going on in this country. And I would just say before there was the Fight for 15, before there was the Our Walmart campaign or the minimum wage campaigns, was a student by the name of Maricela Castro, who was the daughter of farm workers. And she came up with the idea. She saw kids taking food from her back and putting it into their backpacks from a YMCA program. And that led her to say, and she asked them why, and they said, my parents don't make enough money, so my brothers and sisters are going hungry. That led to her to come up with the idea for raising the minimum wage in San Jose from $8 to $10. Wow. And hundreds of meetings later, we met, and we brought in labor and the nonprofit community and the faith community, and we won. We were outspent 10 to 1, and when we defeated the Chamber of Commerce and the Restaurant Association and had the single greatest increase to $10. But here's the thing that I want your folks to know about is that now it's moving to 15 because Mountain View and Sunnyvale have both committed to 15 by 2018, our two neighboring communities, and Palo Alto is looking at the same. So there is a movement to drive that up, just as the mayor in New York is trying to drive up that minimum wage. But one last thing I want to say is that we're having a public works initiative, both at the city and the county level, that is going to be pushing forward in 2016 for that election that we're working on right now with Catholic Charities.
And those are the kinds of things that that leaders around the country can do. Well, Scott, I want to thank you so much for articulating these rights in your book, Ending Extreme Inequality, an Economic Bill of Rights to Eliminate Poverty. Thanks so much for joining us.
Sonali, thank you for having me.
This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our senior producer. Anna Buss is our assistant producer. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Alexander Hobbs is our technical director. Kiana Turner and Federico Garcia are our audio engineers. Annie Mendoza is our social media coordinator. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprisingwithsonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you Monday.